Okay. Hi. Hey guys. Welcome to Bootcamp Prep Day 2. We're going to really start diving into material today, so that's kind of exciting. Before we do that, you probably should know who's talking to you. I'm Corey. You guys, Leanna probably mentioned me yesterday. I'm going to be your other Bootcamp Prep instructor. This is a super exciting course because it is an amazing transition for those of you who are just stepping into programming and for those of you who are coming back to programming. By a show of hands, how many people have experience in another programming language before this course? Cool. Yeah, so a couple of you. Nice. How about how many of you want to go into a full-time immersive boot camp after this course is over? Yeah. Nice. So a lot of you. So that's kind of been the trend here. Is a lot of people are here obviously to get into either full stack or another boot camp full time after this. And so that's pretty awesome. And this course is hopefully going to do more than that. Sure, I'm going to give you the tools to actually help you get into these boot camps and access that, but I'm hopefully going to help you think at a different or like a higher level. And that's kind of my goal from this course, is more than just turning you into somebody who can recapitulate enough information to get into a boot camp. Okay, so on that note, like I said, I'm Corey Greenwald, and I'm a graduate of Full Stack in the 1604 cohort from last year. Before that, I have more than 8 years of experience in programming. I started by making video games when I was like 10 years old in a language called Game Maker. Has anyone heard of Game Maker? Yeah, it's like a drag and drop, like, really, I'm hesitant to call it a language, actually. But the logic behind it is no different, right? Like, if somebody does something, do something, right? And you're going to see, and those of you coming from other languages could probably support this, that when you learn a language, you're not really learning, like, sure, there's some syntax associated with it, which we're going to go over, but the concepts are going to translate no matter what you do. That's why you'll become a developer. Sure, you'll specialize in a language, and it might be more difficult to transfer over to something you don't know, but the concepts translate really nicely. So that's why I said I want you to take everything that we do in this course and really come at it from a conceptual approach. Like, make sure that you're understanding what we're doing and sometimes why we're doing it. And the reason why I say sometimes is because programming is a lot like math in the sense that all of these things exist. Right? Like everything like that is in programming exists in some kind of form, right? But you can only start by learning this little entry point, and we're going to build up as quickly as we can and as efficiently as we can. But there are going to be times where both I or Leanna are going to have to say to you, great question, hold off on that. And the reason for that is not because we don't want to explain it to you, it's because explaining it right now might cause more confusion in your learning process than maybe beneficial. So that's important to keep in mind as well. With that being said, I encourage you to challenge me throughout this course. Ask me questions whenever you have them, and get excited about the material that you're learning. The more passionate you guys are about it, the more passionate I'm going to be about it. And so definitely, it goes both ways. So that's a little bit more than I put up there. But right now, what do I do? Well, I work at Winter Media. It's the company that owns Rolling Stone, Us Weekly, and Men's Journal. If you have any questions about that, I'll be making a lot of media references, because a lot of what we do translates really well to like what other media companies do, maybe like the New York Times or the New Yorker, something that you guys might read. And also, people tend to be pretty familiar with those companies. So I'll make references to their website or something that I had to do at work or something that might translate well. Cool. So just like many of you, how many of you came from a background not in programming? Yeah, right? That's what's awesome about this place, right? Like, you're all here because you care about this topic now, right? But you totally, were interfaced with something else, and maybe whatever else you were doing inspired you to kind of take this on at the same time, or you're like, I have a great idea for an app in this field. Shit, how do I build that? All these things, that coming from different backgrounds, you get to experience things that other people in this room didn't, and you'll be able to bring a different, unique approach to whatever problems that you have to solve. And I think that's really exciting. Me personally, I came from a background in neuroscience. I did my undergrad degree in neuroscience. I actually was going for my PhD in neuroscience, and I left my PhD program because I found out I was really good at being lazy and automating my own experiments. So I got more into actually like building the software to run my tests than actually to get out there and do the surgeries and do the experiments. And I said, you know what, if I'm going to do this, then I might as well go into software. And so I left. I had a couple classes in computer science from college and high school, and I had my background in programming in Java, but I didn't really know how to develop an application. I knew how to program. I didn't know how to develop. Two different things, right? In this course, we're going to learn how to program, right? But the next event after this, when you ramp up to a full, immersive boot camp, when a fully immersive boot camp, you're going to actually be learning how to develop applications. This course is about programming and learning how to think logically and approach problems in a comprehensive way. Learn how to work with other people and really teach to learn. You guys paired up yesterday, right? I think pairing up is one of the best ways to actually learn how to problem solve, because not only do you have to understand how to solve the problem, if the person next to you isn't understanding how to solve that problem, you need to explain it to them in a way that they can understand it. And being able to teach is a really one of the best ways to actually learn something. All right. So that's enough about me. What I want to know now is a little bit about you guys. I'm going to quickly open up the attendance sheet, and I'm going to... What did you guys do as an icebreaker yesterday? What questions did you have to... Spirit animal. Okay, we're going to do... let's just do hobby. I always think hobby's interesting. And so I want your name... name, if you want to share where you're from, and a hobby. Okay? Let me just quickly open this up. Okay, all right, so let's start on this side of the room. Hi, how are you?
Hi, good. My name is Priya, and I like to draw and to cook.
Awesome. Do you have anything in particular you like to draw?
Figure drawing, the live model.
Oh, cool. Very cool. I have no artistic capabilities. When it comes to design at work, I just follow the specs according to plan. Nice to meet you, Priya. Nice. Like video games or like do it yourself? Nice. Cool. What did you say your name was? Dennis. Thank you. Nice to meet you, Dennis. All right, I guess let's go back up here.
I'm Lizzie, or Elizabeth. I like to do ceramics and just study sort of visual art sort of thing.
Very cool. Again, I wish I could relate more to visual arts, and I mean, I was into gaming, I guess, for like making games for a little bit, so I needed like sprite designers and that kind of stuff. I tried.
My brother was very much into that. I
Oh,
would just sit and watch.
Gotcha. Well, look, you're here now, so now you'll be able to contribute, right?
Yeah.
Great. Nice to meet you.
Hi, my name is Bobby.
Hey, Bobby.
One of my hobbies is I like to play soccer.
Very cool. Like you play like on a league over the summer?
Yeah.
Cool. Very cool.
My name is Chino, and I like to watch movies.
What kind of movies?
Any.
Do you have like a favorite like genre?
Just drama.
Drama? Yeah. No, I'm a movie guy too. That's why I'm asking. You know, I like psychological thrillers. You know, the ones where you're like, oh my god, after like, what just happened? Memento. Anyone see Memento? Probably one of my favorite movies of all time. A little outdated reference, but we'll go with it. Wait? Can you repeat your name one more time?
Chino.
Okay. Can you spell it?
J-O-N.
Gotcha, Juno. Gotcha. Thank you.
I'm Bobby also. I love to go to the gym.
Awesome. Very cool. Yeah, I've been trying to get more into that. I'm working on it. So we'll see. By the end of this course, I'm going to have a progress marker hopefully each week. Nice to meet you, Bobby.
Nice to meet you.
Trying to find you on here.
Yeah, Bob. B-H-A-T.
Gotcha. And so, other Bobby, what's your name? Like, is it also Bobby on here?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know. All right, I'm gonna look into that after. Sorry, let's keep going. Grace? Cool. And you see you like to walk around different parks? Awesome, awesome. Yeah, definitely, especially as it gets nicer out, being outdoorsy. Definitely fun. Nice to meet you. Could you speak up a little bit? I'm sorry. Oh, awesome. Yeah, I actually went to a talk on that, on the actual encrypt. It's pretty crazy. If you understand that stuff, you're pretty ahead of the curve. The encryption on that is pretty still out of my conceptual understanding. It's pretty. Gotcha. Very cool. What was your name one more time? Seth. Nice to meet you. Okay, let's go back up here. Yep.
I'm Lee. I've been learning Spanish for the last year or so. That's actually part of how I got into wanting to learn that program.
You're like, I'm learning languages already. Let's translate it to.
Literally, yes, that's
Yeah,
exactly.
gotcha. Nice. Cool. What did you use to learn Spanish?
Sorry?
Did you like use like a Rosetta Stone, or you're just like teaching yourself?
I started with Duolingo and then I started taking classes at this place, Fluent City, which.
Oh, okay, gotcha. And then you're like, I'm gonna go to a great place like Full Stack, and here we are.
That's the plan.
Cool. Nice to meet you.
Hi, I'm Claire. I like jogging.
You like what?
Jogging.
Awesome.
My name is Eugenia. I think my main or biggest hobby is learning. So I like to learn, so I'll be into marathon, but once I'm done with the marathon, I'll be all over CrossFit, and when I'm done with the CrossFit, I'm turning into something else. So recently I've been taking a lot of cooking classes of different cuisines.
Gotcha. That's awesome that you just keep going. Yeah.
Yeah.
Duh. Make sure you have a cool down time at some point, right? It's important to take breaks. So, especially with when things start ramping up, the best thing I can suggest with this is 6 days a week. There's really it's really important to continue outside of this course. Like at the end of this course, I'm going to suggest you go back and do all the problems again, because you're going to be amazed that something that's going to take you an hour and a half today is going to take you 6 to 7 minutes at the end of this course. So that's pretty exciting. But also, it's important to have that middle ground opportunity where you can do things like cooking and jogging and marathoning and I wish I went marathoning. That'd be great. Great, nice to meet you.
I'm Emily, probably Emily Grace over here.
Perfect. Thank you.
I probably split my free time pretty equally between reading and video games.
Nice. What kind of video games?
I play a lot of Dota, some MOBA games.
Yeah, I play League. Sorry.
Really?
Or Smite. I really like Smite. Anyone play Smite? No.
Smite's cool.
I like Smite. Thank you. But very cool. Very cool.
My name is Michael, and I like to play Overwatch.
I tried. It's a good game. It's a great game. It's just I like the MOBA. I like the developing and the that whole thing. But that's awesome. So that's like one of your big hobbies. You do that a lot.
Yeah.
I also joined the party too late. I think that was the problem with Dota too. Is like everyone's just too good. Everyone's really good at these games. People are really they put a lot of time in. Yeah, exactly. So I'm relatively new at that. So anyway, enough about me and video games. Sorry, back there.
My name is Ron. And I also like learning. But things pretty much stuck with, I guess, the last couple of years is scuba diving. So,
What did you say?
scuba diving.
Oh, love scuba diving. I'm randomly certified for like a couple different. I have a couple different. When I was like 15 or whatever, when you first can like get it, I did it, and then I didn't do it since. But I should go away. That's what I'm learning, guys. I think I need to go on vacation at some point. Not right now. We have a whole course to go through, but at some point, I think that's on my agenda now. Thanks.
I'm Jenny. I would say all my free time I like to explore different places. I just, drove to Schenectady last
Cool.
month, just to explore the location and stuff like that. And also I'm very active and I like water sports.
Oh, cool. Like water polo and
Kayak.
stuff, kayaking.
Just not Miami.
Cool.
Doing all type of water sports.
Very cool. Nice.
My name is Mark, but on the attendance it should be somehow.
Yep. Thank you.
Let's say my main hobby would be rapping.
Rapping.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I was pursuing music like for the past year, and somehow I ended up here.
One of the other instructors actually is like really into music. What do you call it? He does he teaches like a band class like a couple nights a
I
week.
was
So
taking it pretty seriously, but then like making it as an Asian rapper in America is
well, I mean, don't let that be your limitation, but definitely like I don't know. You could start thinking of like software applications of how
I
to.
was actually planning to do that.
Yeah. There's something called Band.js you should look into when you further along, so you can remember that Band.js. It's pretty cool. You can like use functions that will let you create music basically with raw code, which is pretty cool. Hey,
I'm Joe. Hobby
what's your last name, Joe?
Kohatsu.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I like to play soccer and read about soccer. Another hobby is I like to try different types of food.
I almost got a job at Major League Soccer, but the guy I kept bothering him. Which, by the way, when you're going for jobs, make sure, which is really far down the road, by the way, we've got like a while, but you should definitely keep pursuing and like keep at it and like to the point where it's like almost annoying, but like not annoying yet. And then like finally, I annoyed the guy enough where he was like, "I really liked you, but I filled the position. Let me refer you to my friend at Rolling Stone." And from there, I hit it off, and I ended up getting the opportunity. So definitely just like keep pursuing. So anyway, there's a lot of cool opportunities, especially in soccer now, as Major League Soccer is blowing up, right? Like the need for they went from like 15,000 viewers or something like that to 18,000 viewers in like a couple months. So it was a pretty cool ramp up. And so now they have to hire people to deal with an application that they've been outsourcing for years. So, hey, how are you?
Hi, I'm also Joe. I was the attendance from St. Joseph program.
Yep, I only got two of you, so there we go.
And for my hobby, I'm really into classical music.
Awesome. It's really good to focus too. I've learned that. That's
Yeah,
when I need to like get in the zone. I'll put on some classical music.
definitely. Probably could be useful to calibrate my like keep my head against the wall as well.
You're gonna be fine. But yeah, it's always a good solution. Nice to meet you.
Hi, I'm Kevin, and I've recently gotten really into baking. Like I never knew how to really bake, so I learned how to make bread, different kinds of bread, and the science behind baking.
How about banana bread? Where are we stand on banana bread?
More like cake. I like to make like
Oh, like real bread? Oh, no, no, I'm just kidding.
I made my own croissants and baguettes. And
Also interested.
it's like the
Yes. Very cool. I like to cook more than I like to bake. I would like to bake. I just feel like there's a lot involved with baking more than cooking too, but at least with baking I feel like you gotta buy sugar. It's like, oh, sugar. Sorry, go on.
My name is Melissa, and I'm developing some arts and crafts.
Awesome. A lot of artists in this class. I'll start back up at the front here. Hey.
Hey, Kate. Sorry, was there something I mentioned about?
Where you're from, I think we all dropped that, right? We all stopped. I have no idea where any of you are from, so.
Here.
Hi, Kate, from here.
Hi. I'm into writing.
Cool.
Hobby.
Very cool.
Where do you stand on banana bread?
Where do I stand? I'm a huge banana bread supporter. I always am a fan of banana bread. Actually, that's not true. I was not always a fan. Until recently, I was like, why have cake of bananas. Bananas are like okay fruit, right? And then it's like you're gonna make bread of it or cake. But then I had a really good piece, and it changed the game. So that's how I stand on banana bread. I think that's important for our programming skills, for all of us to know where I stand on that. So, do you like banana bread?
I do. I have very strong feelings about
Good. That's important. Nice to meet you, Kate.
I'm Henry. I like to do. I'm a musician, but I like to do music outside of my. I'm a classical violinist, like jazz, bluegrass, I like to do that stuff.
Oh, very cool. How long have you been doing that for?
Music.
Yep.
25 years.
Oh, wow.
So,
You're probably very good. Hey, how are you?
Hi, I'm Kaz. I like reading.
Cool. What? Any kind of books in particular?
Not really. Right now I'm reading this book called History of Everything.
Oh, okay. Cool. That sounds like a lot of stuff.
But it's good.
They really nailed it with that title. They really, it's good.
I am Amit.
Nice to meet you.
In the summer, I like checking out waterfalls, going around all New York State. In the winter, I snowboard.
Awesome. It's like some form of water, please. Like no matter what. That's where do you snowboard?
Whenever I get a chance, the last time I just went up a couple weeks ago when I was doing it.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Still have not been up
You still
there.
have to go pretty far away.
Yeah.
Nothing around
Yeah, I used to go to Massachusetts, which was a few hours, but it wasn't like great. Mine's all right.
I wish I was living out west.
Oh yeah, of course. There's nothing like that, but you also get New York, so woohoo. Hey,
Hey, I'm Callie Rogoski.
I'm sorry, what did you say your first name was?
K-A-L.
Callie, gotcha.
And I guess it's a hobby. I practice a lot of yoga.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely a hobby. That's awesome, cool.
My name's Dominic. For hobbies, I like to write. I also snowboard and play badminton and frisbee. And that's it.
Awesome. Very unique group. Awesome. Everybody's got a lot of interesting hobbies and passions, and I hope that will drive you in something specific that you'd like to do in this field and work toward that. Especially after this course is over, I'll also urge you to start on a side project. Start looking into some stuff on your own, and I'm always willing to give you guidance on how to go about that as well. Okay, I just want to double check one thing before we start. Was Edon here?
Yes, right here.
Hey, how are you?
Hey,
Did I miss you?
no, I mean, I just got here, so I just.
Oh, gotcha. What is a hobby that you like to do?
Hobby, play acoustic guitar.
Awesome.
And online games, RPG mainly, like online MMORPG.
Cool. Gotcha.
And yeah, and I'm getting into the cyber because I've had past experiences. I lived in Israel for a year, then I
Nice.
moved back, so I'm interested in cybersecurity and app development.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting, especially with cybersecurity, because it's a game of like cat and mouse, really, that just continues and continues and will get infinitely more complex. So, definitely something to stay on the edge of your seat for.
Yeah, it's always updating.
Absolutely. Eugenia was here. I just didn't mark you. Yep. Okay. Farheen. Okay. Marcelo. Claire. Mengshi. Oh, okay, cool. Sorry, I must have missed you. All right. Awesome. Cool. That's everybody. And now we can talk about why we're here. Cool. So, here's how I like to lecture. I think in these early weeks, it's important that I spend more time lecturing because some of these topics, not necessarily today, are going to be relatively new. And the interesting thing, kind of like math, is that everything we learn does not go away. It just becomes something that becomes innate to you, something that becomes an aha, like a something that will become readily understandable to you. And as we go forward on from these lectures, we're going to only build out and kind of fill in some of those why gaps and a little bit more behind the scenes. Every day, with the exception of really today, I'm going to pose you a question that given your knowledge at that given time, you might think that you know the answer to, but you shouldn't. You don't. And we're going to find a problem in everything that we do and kind of find a way to solve it. And that's how we're going to progress through this course. So what I will say is this. Bear with me. A couple of these first days are going to be a little bit like lecture heavy because there's a lot of material to catch up on and review and cover. So if we don't have a full amount of time to go through all of the problems, I encourage you to finish them on your own after this course. And of course, I'll open up the solution set. And the fellows, by the way, the fellows are back there, right? Fellows, do you guys want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure.
What's your hobby, Jeff?
Oh, my hobby. I guess right now I'm kind of learning Clojure. The language, not the...
Yeah. Cool.
I'm Allie, and my hobby is
Very cool. I used to love that when I was younger. It's good. But then as you get older, it gets a lot harder, right? Like your body's just not like you're straight. Yeah, exactly. Like proportionally, it doesn't work as well. So, all right. So today we're going to be reviewing JavaScript types. Now, everybody in this course did Jumpstart Online. Yes. Okay. So most of this hopefully will be a review to you, but we're going to kind of put it in perspective. Now, what's cool is what I'm going to talk to you about today is everything that there is in JavaScript, right? These are all of the possible tools that we can use in terms of types. These are the only types of variables that can physically exist, all right? And occasionally, the people who make JavaScript, which we'll get into a little bit later, will actually release a new one. But in general, these have been pretty solid and in foundation for years and years and years since the release of JavaScript. Okay, so this is something that's interesting about JavaScript as well. Types in JavaScript are a little bit more fluid. So again, how many of you started in another language? Like maybe Java or C or something like that. In those languages, when you actually use a variable, you declare it, you need to specify, I am using this type of variable. I am using this type of variable. In JavaScript, we say var x is equal to 5, right? We don't worry about like, hey, is this thing a number? We know that it's a number. Right? The computer somehow figures out that thing's a number. Again, black box, right? On how that actually happens. But it just knows that it's a number. And that's actually always going to be the case in JavaScript. It is going to know what type of variable we are using based off of the way that we write it. The way that we write it. We don't need to specify that we're giving it a number or a string or a Boolean, right? We're literally going to feed in some kind of variable, and it's going to understand what we meant. Now, there's something good about this and something bad about this. The good thing is you have this really big fluidity between data types. You'll be able to declare a variable and then change it really easily. You can move a variable that once represented a string to now represent a number, right? These are really cool things that we'll be able to do in JavaScript. The downside to that is that you, the developer, are responsible for keeping your data type straight. You need to know what kind of data you are using. The purpose of data, right, is to actually provide a piece of information that is appropriate for solving our problem. For example, if I wanted to know how old somebody was, a proper variable would be a number to represent somebody's age. Right? It wouldn't really make sense to do that with any of these other data types, which we'll get to. Conversely, if I wanted to keep track of someone's name, right, the appropriate way to probably keep that piece of information would be in a string, right? Some way to keep track of their name or some kind of phrase. All right. So before we go too much into when to use each one, let's talk about what we have at all. What is our toolkit? So first is strings. And we can see an example up here of hello. And we're going to go into what each of these are individually right after this. And so strings, right, we would use a string when we want to represent a word, a phrase, or even a character, a single character, a sentence, anything that requires a bunch of words together, we would use a string. We use a number when we want to deal with something numerical, right? Something quantitative, whether it be decimals or whole number integers, positive or negative, we are going to use the number data type. Now again, this is a weird thing to say. What does that mean, use the number data type? You're not going to be defining something as a number. But when you declare a variable, if you happen to say it equals 2, it will automatically understand that it is a number. And we're going to take a look at how that operates actually as well. A Boolean. A Boolean could be one of two things, a true or false. Did you eat breakfast today? That generally can be true or false, right? Yes or no, right? Anything that can have two possible states, the appropriate type of data to use to represent it would be a Boolean. Undefined and null. I'm going to hold off on these for a little bit because these two get very confused. People tend to get very confused in the difference between these two. And I'd rather show that here. So these are all of our primitive data types. Just out of curiosity, does anyone know what a primitive data type means? Okay, so a primitive data type, in short, cannot be redefined so in terms of memory, right, so underneath all this stuff, right, at the very bottom, there is something in your computer called memory, which needs to keep track of all these variables that you're using and declaring, right? All of these primitive types take up a specific amount of memory, a specific amount of memory. So what that means is, for example, you guys ever hear the term bit? Like, I have so many bits. Right now we're dealing with gigabytes, right? A byte is 8 bits, right? And then you go all the way up to kilo, and then you have megabytes, and then gigabytes, and now we're even at terabytes, right? And some people have picobytes, right, which is 1,000, whatever. So, but the point is that that's memory. A Boolean is actually the smallest amount of memory that we can use. It is only 1 bit. 1 bit. Right? It's either a 1 or a 0, a true or a false, on or off. So when we use something like a Boolean to represent, like some people go like, hey, if I want to represent if I ate breakfast this morning, right? Why don't I just use a number, like 1 versus 0, right? Well, the mathematical calculation in the background is that Booleans are going to be inherently much more efficient to solve that problem because they take up a lot less memory. They're a lot smaller. Now, I wouldn't worry too much about memory right now, but that's just a little fun fact in the background of where the primitive data types come from, okay? Complex data types, or object data types, okay? These can be changed. They can be declared, they can be added to, removed from. They're very dynamic in memory. In fact, every time you change them, we just move in memory where we're going to add stuff to. They're very dynamic and reusable. Objects give us capabilities that these primitive data types do not. Which is, what if we want to store multiple pieces of information? For example, an object will let us relate a key to a value. An object will let us say, hey, I have an object which is going to represent, let's say, a person named Corey. Okay? But now I have a way of relating two pieces of data. I can say, name Corey. Right? And now I have an object that would be able to relate two pieces of data, my name and what my name actually is. None of these other data types provide us a way to do that. And we'll go more into that as we approach objects. Arrays. Arrays are a list of stuff. What if I wanted to keep track of all of your ages? Or, for example, the attendance sheet that I just filled out, right? That's a really good example of an array. It's a list that I can just simply fill in with values, right? Where maybe each of these represents one of you. And maybe I put a 1 there, or a true there, or something like that, if you're here, and a false there if you're not. An array is a list of information that is ordered. The next two, date and regex, I'm going to skip. We're not going to go into those into this course. Date is pretty straightforward. You have there's an object on your computer. You can actually just say new date like that, and it'll generate a date object, which is essentially the way that we deal with time in JavaScript. Not something we're going to really approach in this course. Fun fact about dates, they were made from the epoch which was like 1970. I think it was like the start of Unix, the Unix epoch, the first time Unix released like an operating system. And anyway, the way that they set it up is they're going to run out of possible dates by like 2030. So like after that, this won't work anymore. And it's a serious problem. It's like Y2K all over again, seriously. Because so many websites, you know, the entire internet is JavaScript, right? Like if you didn't know that, prepare to be mind blown. Like there's no other options out there. The reason why JavaScript is such a landmark language is because, first of all, we have no other options. Every browser renders JavaScript. Every single time you go to a website, that website's sending you back JavaScript to display. Nothing else. Nothing else. And we'll talk about kind of some of the recent breakthroughs that allowed JavaScript to become this full stack language, hence Full Stack Academy, within the last couple of years. But anyway, so finally the last thing on here is function. Function. And a function is a recipe, a way to do something, way to complete a task. Anytime you find yourself repeating code or doing something multiple times, we want to think of maybe using a function instead. Okay, any general questions on this? Yep.
Slightly silly question. With numbers, it's just numbers. There's no like integers versus float or anything like that.
Exactly. So that's exactly what I'm getting at. So like JavaScript abstracts all of that. You don't need to worry about numbers. In memory, in case you're interested, they're all stored as doubles. Yep.
What about the toString? That you can change a number to a string.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to talk about that actually today. Good question. So that's another thing that's really nice about JavaScript is how fluid we can move between these different data types, and we're going to absolutely get there. Any other questions? We all excited?
Yeah.
Yeah? All right, cool. So let's start with numbers. Okay, so simply type numeric digits. No quotes around them, nothing. We can declare a variable just by saying var x is equal to 5. And now we have an x variable that represents the number 5. Right? We can do the same with decimals and negative values, all exactly the same way, all using the var keyword to declare our variable. So for numbers, we might think of, so this is the conceptual part that I'm trying to get at, right? Like at the end of the day, why would you use a number? Well, when you have something quantitative that you need to keep track of that has more than 2 possible states, right? If it has 2 possible states, what's the better alternative? A Boolean, right? Exactly. So unless your 2 possible states are 1-year-old children and 0-year-old children for like some kind of medical, I don't know, whatever. But the point is like you got to think about what is the appropriate what is the appropriate data type for my problem. So the problem posed here is how many cookies do we have? Well, that definitely sounds like a numerical answer, right? Okay. Also, this includes 0. Any questions on the declaration of a number? Right, we've all seen this before. Hopefully a little bit of a review from Jumpstart. Okay, so one of the coolest things about numbers is being able to perform these mathematical operations, right? So there's 5, right? There's 5 big mathematical operations, right? We have addition, subtraction, division, multiplication, and modulation. Does everyone here know about the mod remainder? Everybody learned about that in Jumpstart as well, right? What remainder does? This is really big, by the way. This is, believe it or not, I find myself using this one probably even more often than some of these other ones. Because knowing a remainder is something that's extremely important. What's one big use case of using a remainder? Yeah, right? So if we take any number and we mod it by 2, right? If we get back a 0, we know it's even, right? If there's no remainder, we know it's even, right? And if we don't get back, if we get back an odd number, we know it's odd, right? So let's go ahead and take a quick look at that. I think you guys have seen this before, but okay. So if, by the way, can you guys hear me in the back? Yeah, right? I'm pretty loud. That's why I don't use the mic. If you ever have a problem, just let me know and I can do it. I just feel bad for the people up front if I'm using a mic because I'm generally pretty loud. But okay, so, right, I can declare a variable, let's say num, right? And I can set it equal to 10, right? And then I can check what the remainder of this thing is. So I can just do something like console log. We learned about console log, right? This is a way of printing out information. And this is important. Console log is only for the developer. It is only for the developer. People think that when you console log something, you're actually like representing your answer. You're not. It's just a way for the developer to see what's going on, right? If I console log num, right, this is only available for me to see. So when, and I know that mindset might sound weird right now, but like think about it this way. When you're on a website, right, you don't see this console. You don't see this. You see like that web page that you're interacting with. So printing something out is helpful because you'll be able to know what value it has, but it doesn't actually do anything. We're going to get into that in the future, right? We're going to need to do something called returning a value to actually get it, right? But we'll get there. All right, so anyway, console logging tells us our value, right? And so I could actually go ahead and just print out num mod 2, right? And so we'll see that we get back a 0, which is interesting. And in fact, because we're not modding by 2, if we change this to an odd number, right, 2 goes into 9 4 times with a remainder of 1. And in fact, this is true of all odd numbers. We'll have a 1 as our remainder. So the mod will actually just give us the remainder between these two. So I could easily turn this into an if statement, right? Like if num mod 2 is equal to 0, right? Console log, this is even, right? Otherwise, something like that. Pretty cool. All right, so we could start thinking outside the box where else these things might be useful. So arithmetic is actually restricted to numbers. We can't use arithmetic with any other data type. It doesn't mean that we can't use those operators with other data types. We'll get there. But we can't do math, right? You can't add a string and and 5 together. Well, you can, but it's not going to give you what you expect, right? It's not going to perform a mathematical operation. It'll do something different, which we're about to get to. So you can only really do math if you're sure you're dealing with numbers. If you're sure you're dealing with numbers. Okay. So operations do not actually do anything when you just perform them. Here's what I mean. So what we need to do to actually, so for example, over here, right? Let's go back to oh, did I exit out? Oh no. All right. Okay, so if I say var x is equal to 5, and then I say x times 2, and then I console log x, what's the value of x? 5, right, yeah, none of you fell for that, that's great. So, exactly, right, because this modification was short-lived, right? It didn't do anything. I didn't reassign it anywhere. For me to actually impact the value of x, I would need to reassign it to x to actually have an impact on it, and now x will be 10. Any questions on that? That is about reassign, and you must reassign. If you do not, and sometimes you might want to make a new variable, right? You might want to say like, I don't know, double x is equal to x times 2. Something like that. That's totally okay also. Oh, no, that's totally not okay. I need to do this, right? Var double x. Did you guys notice that didn't throw an error? Does anyone not like that? It's a problem in JavaScript, actually. Yeah, so we'll get into that on another day, but make sure you use the var keyword when you're declaring a variable. Because if you don't, it will still work, but not the way that you think it's working. And again, that's a talk for the future here, but just get in the habit of 2 things. Making sure you use that var keyword, and making sure you end your statements with a semicolon.
Can you get rid of that information?
Sure. I don't think we're going to like the alternative because this was put in by the last class as that as an alternative.
Let's leave it back.
What do you guys think?
Put it back.
Paper on?
Let's leave it on.
I was not involved in the design of this situation, but I am sorry. Hopefully, we'll make it. Okay.
I have a question.
Yep.
Yeah, do you have to use var if you're declaring a variable in for loop?
So yes. In short, yes. There are actually better alternatives than var, which we're going to get into in the last week of this class. I'm going to tell you never to use var again in a few weeks. But for now, yes, always use var. You should never use a variable without declaring it. Short answer. So you're saying it worked, right? You were able to say I is equal to 0, I is less than, right? Yeah. We're going to have a lecture next week on scope, where we're going to talk about where do variables exist, right? Like at some point, so when I run my JavaScript, there's actually an engine in the background that's running this thing and like interpreting my code and converting it down into machine signals, okay? When you don't use that var keyword, you basically say to garbage collection, the thing that goes around and cleans up memory and throws away variables, this thing has no end term. I have no idea what the scope of this thing is. So it puts in the largest possible scope and it never throws it away. This is very dangerous because if you had a really big application and you declared a variable, like that's the definition of a garbage variable, right? Like in a for loop, something that's literally just there to get you through the loop, right? Like, and you declared that variable and you didn't give it like a var like name to it. Basically, any other time you could use that variable anywhere else in your application, it would know the value of it. So if that sounds like a good thing, it's actually not, because you're basically polluting the scope of your application. Again, I think beyond what this lecture we'll get to, but we'll get there. But for now, short answer, use var. Any other questions on assignment or anything? Okay. Right, so we talked about numbers. Booleans are awesome. So I love Booleans. I think that they are a great tool when you need to deal with two states, which happens a lot. There's a lot of situations you'll be in where you're like, okay, this thing can only have two possible outcomes. And so the two possible outcomes are true and false. This is something that you can never do, by the way, right? This is just, this example up here where it's var false is equal to hello. It's showing you that you cannot have a variable called false or a variable called true. There are a bunch of reserved keywords that you cannot use as variable names. For example, you can't have a variable called var, right? Or for, or if, or any of those things, right? Also, if you find this being a problem, I urge you to consider that your variables aren't named well. Because you really should have descriptive variable names for what they are supposed to do. Consider this. Every day, I go through lines of code that I have not even seen before. Because there's literally like 100,000 lines of code in our code base, right? So I come across stuff, and I see var num, and I'm like, what is that thing even doing, right? I need to have a descriptive name. So right now, yes, the scope of your applications or what you're developing is going to be small, but there's no reason you shouldn't get those habits in place now. All right? Anyway, so Booleans are a really good question if I had to ask, hey, do I have any cookies left, right? Again, true and false are reserved keywords, and any attempt to use them as a variable name will throw an error. So we would actually declare this as something like var x is equal to true, right? Just like that. Cool.
I have a question.
Yep.
If you're assigning true to x, why is it still undefined?
Oh, great question. This is not undefined. So what, okay, this is actually goes back to what I kind of said about console log before. This is a REPL thing. You guys are using REPL, right? Okay, REPL always spits out the return from the last line of code. Always, doesn't matter. So, for example, if all I did was my last line of code said X, and I didn't console log it, right? It will just go and put that as the green thing. It'll say true, right? This is always the response from this. Now, console log of X, we're going to get to it. But really, there's some object called console and some method on it called log. And you're passing it X. Kind of like how, did we learn about any methods yet or functions? We'll get there today, right? So a little bit. When we could pass stuff to functions to make them work, right? Well, that's what we're doing here. We're really passing x to this log function. Now, what does console log return back? After you went and said, hey, console log, here's x, use it. What does it give you back from that function? Nothing. It's undefined. And that's why we get that undefined line. Because console log gives us a response of nothing. Does that make sense? It's like when we have a function and it tells you back nothing. That's why. And I think that'll become a little bit clearer when we get up to functions. Any other questions? Cool. Let's keep going. Okay, so this tends to be a point of confusion. Null. Null is often used as a placeholder. It is often used as a placeholder. This was actually much more important like 10 years ago. But it's still important to note because it still exists. And so we use null when we don't have a value currently, but we want to assign a variable to have no value, so in the future we can assign something to it. One example is this. How many of you don't have a middle name? Okay, yeah, a few of you, right? But if I was writing a piece of software where I needed 3 variables, a first name, a middle name, and a last name, right? What would I assign to be that middle name, right? In the case that those of you who don't have middle names, right? Well, in JavaScript, we could use an empty string, right? We could totally just give it an empty string. But in reality, if we were trying to store this in a database, that's not really an option. And that's where this comes back to, is having a null value to have as a placeholder so that we can feed it into the database that says, hey, keep this tail open so that in the future we can fill it in. The most important takeaway from null is that a value has been declared, a variable has been declared, and the value has been assigned to null. Okay, that is different than undefined. That is different than undefined. Declared is null is we've declared it and assigned the value to null. Okay? And so we can declare it just like that. Var middle name is equal to null. Conversely, I don't know if I'm using that word right, but undefined is a variable that has been declared but not defined. No value has been set. I just say var middle name. Now we've declared middle name, right? It exists. I could console log it, right? But it is undefined. It has no value defined for it. You see the nuance difference there, right? Undefined is literally we have not assigned this thing a value. It is undefined. Null is we've assigned it to have no value, a null value.
I have a question.
Sure.
For what's the slide for this?
Null?
No, right. So instead of using empty string because you don't want undefined to come out, you're going to use null instead.
No, you could use an empty string. The empty string, I don't love that example. Now that I'm thinking about it, middle name isn't necessarily the best approach at that because you could absolutely use an empty string. Null is like, it's hard to get into without talking about databases, honestly, but really null is about an object. It's about an object that hasn't been built yet, right? And we haven't gone too much into objects. So right now, you're basically never going to be assigning something to be null. But something can be null if we've declared it and assigned it to have no value. If you were in the situation where you needed that, where you needed to be able to declare something and say, in the future, this is going to have an object, but right now it doesn't, that's when you'd use a null. So it's a little bit more vague than, because middle name, I honestly would use an empty string to represent somebody without a middle name. But in a database, you can't necessarily do that, depending on the type of database you're using. Null is a little bit of an antiquated type in that sense, but I still see it all the time. Like, it's still something that I find in objects all the time. A lot of times, like, objects will have a null value in them, so that representing that it can have a value in the future, or we can set it in the future. Hopefully that clears it up. It's kind of it's going to be something that you'll get more comfortable with as you start using it, I think, in this course. Any other questions on the difference between null and undefined? Cool. All right. Now let's get into the fun stuff. All right. So all of those data types, we've really covered like 90% of what you're ever going to really do with that stuff. Believe it or not, right? Like you're gonna be able to apply it more, perform some arithmetic, figure out when to make some if statements that maybe print out some trues and falses and whatever. But now we're gonna start dealing with strings. And strings start giving us access to a whole new set of problems, things that we might want to do with strings. What if we want to take a string and we want to reverse it? What if I want to take a string that somebody else wrote? How many of you have heard of a CSV file? Yeah, right? So a CSV file was something that was really big before Excel was big, and you'd be able to save files that are comma separated. So you'd have you'd have a whole bunch of stuff. Where am I? You'd have something like this. You'd have a file that was just like, 7, 13, 21, 36, something like that. What if I wanted to take this and somehow convert it into usable information? Let's get rid of all those commas. How can we do that, right? So strings really provide a new layer of manipulation that we need to be able to do when we solve problems. And this is something that we'll see a lot of the time, right? What if I had everybody's first name, middle name, and last name, but I wanted to construct an email automatically, right? How do I take your first name and then your middle name and then your last name and put them all together, right? If they're separate strings. So these are all real problems that you might have to solve. So anyway, a string is a way of keeping a word or a phrase or character. That's the kind of data that we're dealing with here. Yes?
So this is a question about null in combination with strings. So if you were making this email creator and you did like concatenate all of those, would it put in null or would it not exist?
If you declared a value as null, yes, it would use it. So like if I had something like this, yeah, that would totally look bad. Exactly. That's why the more I think about that example, the less I like it. Var first name, right, is equal to like Corey. Right, var middle name. You guys are getting the whole thing here. Matthew. People used to think like Boy Meets World, like Corey Matthews, but I'm not. All right, so there you go. That's my name, right? So if I could totally combine these things together by saying first name, middle name, last name. Now the issue is they're going to be attached. It's going to look like that, Corey Matthew Grinnell, like that, right? But if all right, I could totally add like some empty quotes or something like that, right? And that'll solve this problem.
The long way though. Is there a shorter way to do that? Or?
As far as you know, no. We'll get there in the last week of class. So there are certain. So I don't have time for that many more tangents. So briefly, JavaScript is becoming very quickly the most popular language in the world, if it's not already. And there's a team of people who basically write the Oxford Dictionary of JavaScript. It's called ECMAScript. It's like, that's why I say the Oxford Dictionary, right? Like there is some dictionary, some like proper way to speak English that almost none of us do, right? We have like this common colloquialism, is that a word, right? Like the way that we talk to each other, right? I don't even know, right? So that's JavaScript. JavaScript is the common folk ECMAScript, okay? Every couple years, they release new stuff, new specifications on how JavaScript should work. And what they do with these new specifications is they make our lives easier. They'll release stuff that improves, like some things that will become tedious by the end of this course. And you're like, dang, I do that a lot. Well, guess what? Somebody else was like, you know what? We do that a lot. Let's come up with a shorter way to do it. That's what the newer versions of JavaScript provide. And if you're wondering why we're not teaching them like right off the bat, it is because a lot of browsers still don't support them. So until all browsers can support it, it becomes something that you need to, there's a little bit more of a higher level, hey, can I use this thing in this situation kind of thing. If you're all, by the way, everybody in here using Chrome? Yeah. I'm going to continue this class under the assumption that you all have Chrome or that you're going to get Chrome.
Is Mozilla okay or
okay, Mozilla is okay. Mozilla is very good. Mozilla's fine. But Chrome is great because it really they're really ahead of the game. They really Google really put so much money into their browser you can't imagine. And so Chrome is very efficient at everything that it does. There is actually some stuff that Mozilla can do that Chrome can't, and vice versa as well. But definitely get Chrome. There's no reason to not have Chrome. And also, when you're actually writing real code, you're going to want to test it in multiple places anyway. Right? Like on my computer, I keep Safari and Chrome and Mozilla. On my desktop, I keep Edge and whatever, and Internet Explorer. Ugh. Anyway, so definitely get Chrome. Okay, so the real takeaway here is I didn't even answer the problem. So let's go back to that. If we added null here, right, it's totally going to put the word null there. Yeah. Which is strange, by the way, that it put the word null there. Not because it actually took the word null, because of what it did to the word null. And this is something that I'm going to get at in a couple seconds. I'm going to come back to that. So what we did here was, with strings, we declare information that's wrapped in quotes. Here it says single or double quotes. I'm going to tell you now that JavaScript should be written in single quotes. JavaScript should be written in single quotes. There is no requirement. It's kind of just the standard. Anything you write in JavaScript will be done in single quotes. Can you use double quotes? Yeah. Occasionally, you'll find yourself getting annoyed by the fact that, let's say I wanted to say, possessive, right? If I wanted to do something like that. So I could do this. If I wanted to say, Corey's house or something like that, right? You're like, okay, this should be a quote. But the issue is the quote is going to end it, right? Does anyone know what I can do here? Yeah. Yeah, I can do a backslash to actually escape the following character. That's called an escape code, an escape command. And what that's doing is saying, hey, the next command isn't controlling JavaScript. The next command is not controlling JavaScript. And so that quote will be inserted in this syntax, right, as part of the string. Okay, so if I wanted to keep track of who is eating my cookies, that is something that we want to keep track of with a string, right? How many cookies? Number. Do I have any cookies left? Boolean. Who's eating my cookies? String. Yes?
Just a quick question. If you use the double quote and then you use the single quote, do you still be using the escape character?
No.
Okay.
No. However, it's a bad habit to get into. Because then you find yourself only using the double quote when you need to use a single quote. And vice versa, right? Like using the single quote when you need to use a double quote. But we find ourselves, believe it or not, quoting with double quotes more often in text than we do oh, somebody said this or something like that, and you want to put in quotes. Now you can do that easily because you can have double quotes in your single quotes. Cool. So strings. The first thing that somebody might have noticed back here is all of a sudden this null, which is totally not a string, somehow got converted into part of a string, right? That's a string. Look at that quote, right? It's now part of a string. It somehow took this thing, middle name, which was null, and converted it into a string. And if you don't believe me, watch what happens if I put in the number 4. It literally took that number 4, which was definitely a number, right? We're all confident that's a number. And all of a sudden here, it was put into the string. And if we still don't think that it's a string, I can use something called the type of operator. And so what type of will do, if we check, let's make this a variable, var full name is equal to this. Okay. Right? And now I can do this. I can console log the type of full name. And what type of does is whatever follows it, it will take it and give you back whatever type it is, whatever data type it is. This is a super useful tool for being able to detect what type of variable you are dealing with. Now, I use this all the time when I'm working, right? When I don't know what somebody else is, what was the context of that variable that they made? Excuse me. Was it a string? Was it a Boolean? I don't know, right? So being able to call type of on it is really helpful. So we'll see that the type of that whole thing is a string. But if we look at the middle name by itself, we'll see that it's a number. Pretty cool. The reason why this is happening is through concatenation. Concatenation, which is not addition, by the way. Concatenation is the process of putting two things or multiple things together. So when I use those plus symbols to combine strings, right, it actually just put those things together, piece them together in a line next to each other, right? That's concatenation. Concatenation will always upconvert to a string. That's really helpful. So what I mean by that is like, I had the number 4, right, as my middle name, which would be a really interesting middle name, right, if my middle name was 4. But if I did that and like I combine it with those strings, it's literally taking that 4, converting it into a string so that it can be combined with the other stuff. This goes back to that two-string method that was mentioned before, which I would say is fairly unnecessary when it comes to integers and strings and when it comes to numbers. Because actually, what I could do is just take my middle name and add an empty string to it. Because even though middle name's a 4, and we're like, all right, we're going to do addition, it comes across a string and goes, I can't physically add that to 4. Right? Like, what does that mean? That doesn't mean anything, right? So the only thing logical to do here is to convert this 4 into a string and combine these together. And now we get a string of the number 4, as we can see on the, because I'm console logging it. So you can see that it's printing out. And to prove that, let's just call type of on it. And now, oops. There you go. And now it's a string. Because I've converted it from a number to, right? You can't physically add an empty string and 4. So the only logical move is to treat them both like they're strings and combine them together. And we'll see this up conversion happen all of the time. Is there any questions on that? Yep.
What if you don't want that to happen?
What if
you want it to give you an error or something if it encounters a number, or like not to do the operation?
Sure. So one way we can handle that is doing if type of middle name is not equal to string. Good question. And so hopefully you guys will totally start devising, because these are real questions, right? Like think about validations that we do on like emails and names and stuff. Like how do we worry about like correct input? And as this class goes on, you're going to have to ask yourself is like, how much do we trust somebody when they type in a number or a string into our application? What level of freedom are we giving them? So when we, especially when we're writing functions, right? Like if I write a function that's going to add 2 numbers together and you put in like dog, right? It's not going to work. It's not going to add my 2 numbers together. So the thing is do you want to care about that? Do you care that your function's not working properly? Do you want to throw an error? What do you want to do in that situation? That is up to you, the developer. And again, these are your tools where you can start combining those things together and coming up with your own limitations. Cool. Any questions on that? All right. So let's talk about accessing a string. So one thing I want to point out about a string is that a string is really a bunch of characters put together, right? Like the word dog is really the string D plus the string O plus the string G, right? Hypothetically. And so we can actually use this logic as our way of moving through a string. In fact, let's go ahead and take a look at that. Let's say we have the string dog, okay? We have just a string right there, dog. If I want to access the first character in this dog, if I want to access the first character in the word dog, how can I do that? I want to get out that letter D. Yeah.
Treat it like an array, so you ask for the 0 index.
Right, so the interesting thing here is this is actually really just indexed, right? This is the 0th index representing D, right? Then we have 1 representing O, and we have 2 representing G. Indices always start at 0 and end at the length minus 1. Always end at the length minus 1. Does anyone know the reasoning for this? So, yeah, do you?
Well, I mean, I don't know the reason, but length always starts from 1. Everyone's counting the lengths. When you do dot length, it starts at 1.
Yes. So I guess that my question is, why don't we start indexing at 1? So I think that it actually comes back to Microsoft and Unix, two of the big like powerhouse companies back in the 80s and 90s, writing their own individual languages. And anything that's like Unix is based in 0, and anything that's Microsoft was based in 1, which is really annoying. If any of you use like SQL, right? Indexing, SQL is a database language. And if you start trying to send JavaScript to SQL, you need to convert everything by 1. Like so the indexing system is unique to JavaScript. Java uses index at 0. C, C++ use index at 0. If you use MATLAB, I'm not sure about Python does indexing at 0. Yeah, I know MATLAB does indexing at 1. Yeah, all of them are different, so that's something to pay attention to. But the fact of the matter is, right, is the indexing system is still the same logical thing. The syntax might be different, but now that you know how to use it, you can use it. Now, there are 2 ways that we can actually go ahead and access the first character here. So, what was your name again? What? Lee. So Lee said to us that we could use it just like an array, right, and use our bracket notation, right, to be able to say, give me the 0th character, right? And now we're saying, here on this thing, give me the character at the 0th location. And we'll see that that prints out exactly what we expect, right? What if I want the G? I could put 2, right? And so that will give me G. What if I do this? It's actually undefined. It's not an error. One thing we're going to realize in JavaScript is that it's somewhat difficult to error. It's somewhat difficult to error out. Generally, it's going to be because of a syntax problem. But here's the theory behind why this isn't an error. The word dog exists, and theoretically, it could have a 3rd index. It doesn't, so it's undefined. That's the logic behind that. All right, so let's go ahead and assign dog to be a word. All right, and let's go ahead and do it this way, because this is a more realistic approach, right? So now let's say I don't know how long the word is. I have no idea how long word is, right? It could be dog, it could be like cocker spaniel, it can be whatever. Puppy, I'm running out of dog words. So it could be anything, right? We don't know what's in word. So if I wanted to access the last character in this word without actually knowing what that word is, how can I do it? Yep, sorry, what was your name again? Mark. So word dot length minus 1 like that?
Yeah.
So that's actually going to give me that the length of the word is 3 and the last index is 2. So we're almost there. We now have access to the last index. Yes?
Use word dot chart at and then put length minus 1 there.
So we could totally, I'm going to get to the char at method. So another way of accessing, so instead of doing word 0, by the way, we could do word dot char at 0. Does anyone know why we would do it that way? This is a side question. Yeah, Lay?
If you didn't want to treat it like an array?
Yeah, and so the answer is actually don't, which is a really interesting point. I show you charAt for one real reason. Most other languages don't treat strings like they're arrays. If you were in Java and you needed to get a character from a string, you would have to use charAt. You don't have an option. Okay? In JavaScript, I urge you to treat strings like they are arrays. And so because of that, I encourage this bracket notation. Okay? But we totally could use charAt and put this inside. And now we get the G, which we expected. And the cool thing is that's going to give us, whatever. Okay, so something like that. I think I spelled that wrong. So cool. It will always give us the last letter. And now we have a unique approach, a modular approach, a reusable approach to always get the last character of a string, which is really cool, right? So if we wanted to replace this with bracket notation, what would I change here? In the back, yeah.
You could use a word open bracket, word length, word dot length -1.
Right, I can totally just replace this charat with that. And that is pretty much the common way to go about doing this, is just like this, getting the last letter. Any questions on that? On a dynamic, yes?
Can you use simply like could you ask for the -1 index, or does that not work in JavaScript?
I think I'm not understanding your
Like
question.
if you put in line 2, if instead of a 0 there you put just -1, would that give you the last character?
Actually, it will. No, it doesn't. So I'm thinking of dot slice. So there are methods that will take in negative parameters and start from the back. What I'll say about that for now is if you can do that and that makes sense to you, then absolutely, it's really useful in a lot of cases that a lot of the methods are that flexible. But I try not to teach to them because it's a little bit like more confusing. I will show you a resource actually on the end of this lecture about how to go exploring further into the methods that we will be doing. Any questions on accessing a string?
It's a negative, always a negative. Like it could be a hyphen or a dash.
Sorry, that doesn't exist. That's not a thing. That was not a thing.
Okay, I'm just saying, if it's in a bracket, it seems to be like minus or subtraction. This is like a
Yeah, so depending on, yeah, exactly. It has to be a negative. Has to be a negative. The only way it would be a dash, right, is if I did something like that. Now we have a dash. Okay. Any questions on accessing a string? Short, the TLDR on that is use bracket notation.
So the -1 can only be used with slice.
Yeah. So we'll get to doing that. I'll briefly mention that. Okay, so we talked about accessing a string, and so one of the last things that I want to talk about today is built-in methods. I hope these don't all load at the same time. Okay, cool. So these are there are a ton of built-in methods. I cannot stress this enough. I do not know all of them. I'm going to preface by saying that because there's literally hundreds. Okay, there's tons on strings, on arrays. There's even some on numbers. I don't know if Booleans really have it, but we're going to learn that there's a reason why all of these exist. And we're going to learn just a handful in here. Probably the ones that are like the most apparent, the most used. And then I'm going to point you in the direction where you can go and find other ones. What's great about JavaScript is every single company is competing for you to use their software. Mozilla wants you to use Firefox. Google wants you to use Chrome, right? So they're literally pouring billions of dollars into their engines that are running those browsers that you use to improve them and improve them and improve them. And so they're constantly adding new stuff, new support to make it faster, better, things like that. So another thing that they're really good at, especially Mozilla, is their documentation. They're really, like, if you've been in other languages where you can't find what a method does, that is not a problem in JavaScript. You will always be able to find it. So let's go into this and then I'll show you what I mean by that. So we just talked about charat. It's one of those with an asterisk up here, kind of like, no, it exists. You can use charat, but you should be using bracket notation. Okay, slice and substring. I'm going to put that same asterisk next to substring. If you go and use Java, you don't have a choice. You must use substring. Substring can only be used on strings. Slice can be used on either strings or arrays. And therefore, I prefer for you to use slice. Okay? Just because it will translate very nicely when we're dealing with arrays. And if we think of strings as an array of characters, it really makes more sense to start thinking of things in that sense. So let's go into slice. Okay, so let's say, let me show you. Okay, so let's say I don't know, what slice does. So what I could do is I could type in slice JavaScript. Cool. And look, so we get array slice and string slice right there. We can click on string. And so it will tell me exactly what it does right here. Look at this. The slice method extracts a section of a string and returns a new string. So when I call this method, it's going to cut a piece of it out and send it back to me as a brand new string. What do we think that term brand new string means? Yes, like.
It's a new object.
Yes, but more, what's the more broader sense of why does that matter? Yeah, what was your name again?
Eugenia. It's not destructive.
Yes, it's not destructive. When we're returning a new string, whatever we're cutting from the original isn't actually modifying the original array, or string in this case. So, back to our word, which we're going to reduce back down to the word like dog. Okay, and I'm going to do word.slice. Okay, that's how we use a method. We take our object, or whatever, or sorry, our variable, I shouldn't say object, our variable, okay, and we call a method on it, just like that. Dot slice. We're using the slice method, okay? And so, what does slice take? Let's see. So slice takes in two parameters, a beginning index and an ending index. And so if you forget what that is, you can totally come right here to the documentation. So, what is a beginning index and an ending index? It means what is the index that we'd like to start at, and what is the index we'd like to stop cutting at. Start cutting and stop cutting. So, if I wanted just DO from this word, right, I would go and start cutting at 0 and stop cutting at 2. Because I want to say start here and end right before you hit there. Now, the second number here, and they'll tell you this in the documentation, is actually exclusive. Exclusive. The first number is inclusive, the second number is exclusive. So this 0 will be included, but this 2 will not be. And so we're really now slicing from 0 to 1. Does that make sense? So I should get back what? DO. Which was our goal, do.
And if you do 0, and isn't it easier instead of 3 or -1, or is there a difference why people do like to copy dog?
So if I wanted to do it the other way, which was saying with -1, I'm going to get there in a second. So good question. Good question. So I would always write it like this. I think it's easier to read. I think it's easier to think about the word like this, personally. But that's up to. Also, if I wanted to just cut the first, if I wanted to, it really depends on the way the problem was asked. It really depends on the way it was asked, right? Are they saying cut everything from the last letter, or are they saying cut the first 2 letters, right? Like, right, exactly. So that's when you start thinking about the negatives. But anyway, so this is what's also really cool about the slice method. Let's go back to this documentation. Didn't we look at this? This is kind of weird. This is in brackets. Does anyone know why that this is in square brackets? Why is the end index in square brackets? What was your name again? Emily.
Because it's not necessary, and just go to the end if you don't include it.
Totally, it's an optional parameter. It's an optional parameter. So if we don't include it, it assumes that we're going to start cutting here and, oh, we don't have an end index, let's go all the way to the end. Okay? So, right, this is like going from 0, and if I just put in 1 here or something like that, it's going to start from L and cut all the way to the end, OG. What if I don't do any of that? Will this work? Actually, it will. That's going to go ahead and just make a copy. That's going to go ahead and make a copy. Much less useful for strings, but we're going to find out in a couple weeks why this is so important for arrays. This is so important for arrays. Anyway, so slice translates really nicely because it works exactly the same way with arrays as it does in strings. Substring will allow us the exact same functionality. Is it substring or is it substring in this? I think it's substring, right? Yeah, so it's substring 0-2, right? And we'll get DO, yeah. Cool. Okay, so this also takes negative parameters, which says start at the other end. So if I wanted to say start slicing, slice off the last letter. If that was the problem, if somebody said slice off the last letter, right? I could write 0, word dot length. right? That will slice off the last, oh wait, word dot length minus 1. Right? That will totally slice off the last letter. Right? So if we do this, we'll get DO, just like we saw. But instead, if I said slice off the last letter, I could instead say just start cutting backward from -1 and go all the way to the end. And that will also give me, oh, is it because we're using substring? There you go. So, oh, that's just going to give me the last letter cut out. I'm missing something here.
That's the last button. That's what it should be.
Like if you only put in one index, it'll be the start one.
Oh, yeah, duh. Yeah, so it's saying start at -1, right? Because I only put in one index, right? So if I want to say go back to the beginning, right? Probably have to do it that way. No, that won't work either. -3, yeah. No. Yeah, that's way better than having to do like from, that makes way more sense. That's way better than having to do from like 0 to dot length, right? So what you're going to see is a lot of the times you'll and you'll see it here too. Like you'll use like some kind of function or some method that you know. Like I used one the other day where it was like last index. You guys know what index of does? Yeah. So we're going to talk about this one briefly. So like let's say I wanted to find out if a word contains a particular letter. I can do word.index of D. And so if it contains this letter D, right, then it's going to give me back the index that it occurs at. For example, in this case it says 0, right? If I had, but what happens if we're in this situation where I have dog, dog? Well, that's weird, right? Because I'm asking for the index of D, but now there's two possible ones that it's going to give me.
I have to write D 2 times and the index up? No?
So, well, I'm sorry?
Oh, no.
So in this situation, it's always going to give me back the first one, right? So I was a little bit annoyed that I had to write my own method to do this. Well, a little bit of Googling shows that there's actually a last index of method, which will give me that one. So really, you're going to see, especially with me and Leanna, like we work with this stuff all the time, right? And so some methods become very used and very common, and some are not. And you're going to find that yourself in this course. So I urge you to explore on your own additional methods that solve the problems better. Like just Google for it, yeah.
So the last index of this, let's say you have like dog like times 4 or something, so it's gonna count from the back.
Yeah, it's going to give me the last one, exactly. Basically, what this is doing is just a for loop starting at the end, right? Looking through each one. Cool. So that's index of and last index of. Any questions on any of this?
Wait, but don't you mean what about the duties in the middle if there's 4 dogs?
What are you saying?
That was the question I.
Oh no, I was just wondering if it counts back.
Yeah, so what, it's going to give me this one then.
So is there a way to get the middle?
No, you'd have to custom write that. Yeah. Well, actually, did you notice that data type I skipped over earlier, regex? We could write a regex to do it fairly quickly. I could just say pull out all of the D's and then give me the one that's in the, like you could divide and conquer, cut out the middle one. So it's not that annoying because why would you do that? Right? Like when would that be an applicable situation? It's probably very rare. When you right, so like that's part of this one. Like they probably added last index of because you don't really need it, right? I could totally do a string.reverse, right? I could reverse the string, right, and then just call index of on it, and it's like the same thing. But it was so common that they added it. Getting the middle one would probably be a very unique like situation where you need to do that. I don't know when you would do that even. You know what I mean? Especially in a string. However, maybe on an array would be more useful, right? Like, give me the middle. I still can't think of a reason why you would ever want to pull something from the middle. But yeah. Cool. Any questions on index of, slice, string, substring, charat?
Substring. What's the I never really.
Same thing as slice. The difference, actually, I'm going to send out. After class, I'll send you we have to kind of wrap it up because I want to get you guys into pairs. So after class, I'll send you guys out a documentation that's the small difference between slice and substring. But yeah. Okay, so 2 uppercase and 2 lowercase are pretty straightforward methods. If we want to convert an entire string to uppercase, we would then say that string dot to uppercase, and it will return back a new string of it to uppercase. This does not modify the original string, just like slice. It does not modify the original string. So if you want to keep it, you need to store it into a variable, right? So we have, word dot to uppercase, just like that, and I console log word, we'll see that word is not uppercase. But if I reassign word, we'll see that it's uppercase now. Same thing with 2 lowercase. We talked about dot length. Okay, so 2 more that we needed to talk about. Probably one of the most useful ones, if not the most useful one that I use, is split. Split. So what split does is it's going to take a string and convert it into an array on the character that you designate. Let's go back to our comma-separated value sheet. Let's say we have a sheet that's just comma-separated values, 7, 10, 15, 33. Really, the most useful form of this, right, would be to take this information and cut it into 4 pieces in an array, right? That would be the best way to use it. Like, this is pretty unusable. I have no math that I can do with that. I have nothing I can do with this piece of information. I want to chop that into something that I can use. This is when split would come in. We see a regular character that's separating all of our pieces of information. In this case, it's a comma, right? And so because we have that, we can take advantage of that by saying split on a comma. So let's say var array is equal to our sheet split on a comma. And so now we'll see, oh, I didn't console log it, right? So console log my array, right? And we'll see that now we have an array of each of those, separate as elements. Okay. So now we're in another weird situation. Anyone notice anything about those numbers? Yeah.
The commas aren't part of the data anymore?
Yeah, but we don't want them. We wanted to get rid of them, right? We want numbers now. But there's another problem here. Yeah. Yeah, they're not numbers, right? Our goal was to get numbers, and we totally don't have numbers. So, like, how do I get numbers, right? So, this is a problem that we're going to have to fully handle another day. But it is important to talk about. We talked about how you can convert a number into a string pretty easily. Everything gets up-converted to a string as long as it's combined with a string, right? However, numbers, if you wanted to take oftentimes, imagine this, right? You're reading in a document, like this is what Excel has to do. So read in this stuff that it saved, right? And then somehow convert it back into number form. Well, what we'd like to do is try to convert a string to a number. And we can do that with something called casting. Casting. And there's a lot of different casts out there. The most common one is something called number. See how that glowed blue? The number class, numbers, which represents all numbers, if you take any number and you wrap it around a string, it'll come back with a number version of it if possible. So if I say var x is equal to number of 5, and I then console log my type of x, we'll see that now, which was a string, is now a number, which is pretty cool. So we can reconvert things back. The reason why I say we can't do this today is because we need a loop. And I don't want to do loops today. I think that's enough. Any questions on any of these methods we talked about? I want to point out one more thing. I know we're going a little bit over on time, but I think it's important anyway that we have these longer lectures on these first couple days. I want to talk about type of for a second, because it is something that's so useful, and I think underused by students in this course. It is really good at checking to make sure that we're dealing with it. Like a lot of times you'll mess up a data type this early on, and that's okay. But always fall back to type up. We can use it on anything. And when I say anything, I don't actually mean anything. So here's what I'm saying. So we can have all different data types, right? Like I can do type of 5, and we know that's going to come back a number, right? Or like dog, and that's going to come back a string. I can do this on true, and we're going to get back a Boolean. If I do this on undefined, we'll get back undefined. Okay, let's get into some weird ones. What about null? Any guesses? Null is actually an object. Null is a type of object. It's a null object. It's an empty object. Not an empty object. It is a placeholder for a non-existent object. It's a null object. So if you do type of on null, it's an object, which is not the greatest thing, because null is not the same thing as an empty object, right? Those are two completely different things. Like this is an empty object and that's a null. So how do we go about differentiating those two things? These are complex problems that JavaScript actually created. This is a whole mess on the internet. So JavaScript, I don't know if you guys know this, was created in like 48 hours. Not making this up. Somebody wrote this language in like, what was it, like a few days, bless you. And so that's amazing. That's amazing. But along with writing a language in a couple days comes a lot of bugs. A lot of bugs, which can't ever be fixed. And why can't they ever be fixed? Because it's all over the internet. Any change that they make on how the language actually works at the bottom line could cause a website to not render anymore if it's specific enough. And so all they can do is add new stuff to deal with these bugs, to give you more checkers. Here's one of the most common ones. One of the things that they can't actually check. So, does anyone know what you get if you try to add undefined in 5?
5 undefined?
You get not a number, NaN, okay? What happens if you do type of NaN? Type of not a number is a number, which makes no sense, right? Because you literally have a data type called not a number, right? And this thing comes back as a type number, which is kind of funny, but when you think about it, it's scary. So anytime a website's checking if type of X is equal to number, right? Anytime, they're also including if it's not a number. That's a problem. So what they had to do was they couldn't change that fact, because some websites literally require that functionality to work today. And so what you would need to do is basically say, and is not a number, which is not equal to true, or is equal to false, rather. Something like that. So they added is not a number because of this problem. Anyway, a couple things to look out for. Type of is really important. Beware of some JavaScript-y things. And also learn to love the language. It's an awesome language. I hope you guys enjoyed this first lecture. I'm going to give you guys a 5-minute break, and then I'm going to break you into pairs for the last hour or so. Okay? Cool. There's a vending machine at the end of the hall, but it does say buy at your own risk. There's a water fountain next to it also that is totally safe. Yep. Hey. Oh, the check. Yes, please. I'm going to have to remind you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay.
By the way, I can be paid